Hey, good morning, everybody. Good to see you guys. If you are new here, my name is John Wagler, and I'm part of the team, and so thankful that you decided to join us here. And we are so close to fall weather. So close, right? But it's been awesome to be in good weather for change. But as Corey said earlier, you know, we invest a lot of time and effort and truly money into creating a safe place for people to explore their faith in Jesus. And we mean that from the youngest to the oldest in all of our environments. And we put a lot of time into that. And our greatest hope is that you would discover purpose, that you'd be known in community, and that you go out and make a difference because of it. And so I'm just so grateful that you're here. And so thank you for being a part of our Sunday here today. We are in week number 5 of our Breakthrough series, and I'll get there in a second. But I did want to talk to you guys. Last week I said, hey, November 18th, we're doing our big share offering. And it's a big deal for us because what we do is it's above and beyond what we normally give, and we just give all that money away. And what we ask people to do is you save up a day's wage. And so we give a day's wage away. And so we all kind of come together and do this. And we've been able to give away over 180 grand over the last few years doing this. And last year alone, we gave over 80 grand. And so my hope is this year is that we'll get closer to 150 grand. And so I'm giving a challenge. And so this is like something we all come together and do some incredible work for. And so you might be saying, well, how do I know my one day's wages? Well, you can go to onedayswage.org and they'll tell you. But just so a little perspective, if you make $30,000, that's $115. If you make $50,000, that's $192. If you make $75,000, it's $288. And here's why this is like a beautiful thing. Some of you guys make more, some of you guys make less, some of you guys will be able to do it, and some of you guys might be inspired. You're like, you know what, I'm going to give double, I'm going to give 3 days' wages. Some of you guys are like, man, I'm really struggling, but I'm going to try and do a half a day. I don't know, but like whatever it is. But when we all come together, what's really cool is something really powerful happens. And I was meeting with RJI, which is Richmond Justice Initiative, and it's one of our partners that we give money to during this offering. And Heather was sharing with me just the incredible things that are happening within their organization, and they are anti-human trafficking, and so they go throughout several states and are in schools and raising awareness and helping with this great curriculum that they have, and that's growing rapidly. But what was really cool was at one point she was just talking about some of the testimonies that they hear. In particular, like I remember she said that one, I can't remember if it was middle school or high schooler, said that, hey, through this curriculum, I just realized that my dad's a pimp. And what ended up happening was like, then the police got involved, and it was really cool to see that here's something that they're doing that we're a part of because they're one of our partners, and we're part of the story, and that justice is happening on the other end, you know, and so making a big difference in the world. So that's coming November 18th, and we're going to say it probably every week leading up to it, just to keep it in front of you guys and to set aside money and getting ready to do so. So we are in week number 5 of our Breakthrough series, and I hope that it's been fruitful for you guys, and I hope it's been bringing up some questions for you to answer in the midst of it. And this whole idea, the whole premise behind the breakthrough is this, is that breakthrough is a sudden, dramatic, and important discovery or development. A sudden, dramatic, and important discovery or development. And here's what I know about all of us. We all need a breakthrough in some area of our life. And with that, and part of this series has been like there's a spiritual component, we talk about it every week, but there's a practical component, which we also talk about every week. And here's what ends up happening. And this is why we have this question. I was like, how's your plan coming? We all hate that question because it forces a response from us. And but how's your plan coming? Because whatever that area of break, I remember that first week, and I was like, "Who needs a breakthrough?" We're all like, "I need a breakthrough," right? We're all like, "Yeah!" We're like, "All right, we're gonna do this. We're gonna come up with a plan. We're gonna put things in place." And then week 2, week 3, week 4, now week 5. Who needs a breakthrough? You're like, I still need a breakthrough. How's your plan coming? I don't have one. And so here's what happens when we don't have one. We're just stuck in the cycle. It's going to be the same thing over and over and over and over again. And it's important for us to begin to develop that plan that we have. And so it got me thinking actually about this question, and it's simply this: do you want to be a dreamer or a visionary? Do you want to be a dreamer or a visionary? And here's why. Dreamers talk. Dreamers get ideas. And they just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. No plan, no process, no structure, no details, nothing. That's what dreamers do. You know what visionaries do? Visionaries get a big idea. And they don't just leave it as a big idea. Visionaries then create a process. They develop things. They put the right people in place. They put structure around them. They pay attention to the details. A lot of times people will use it as a crutch. Like, oh, I'm just a big idea guy. I'm a visionary. I'm like, well, you're actually a dreamer if you don't care about the details. And so visionary, like Steve Jobs was a visionary, wasn't he? But he cared about every little detail. And he cared about putting the right things in place because he knew that if it's just a big idea, nothing will ever get accomplished. And so you need structure, you need a plan, you need a process to actually develop. And so we all need those things when it comes to our breakthrough. How many of you guys feel like you're a little too stressed, overwhelmed, or really anxious, or struggle with worry, honestly? Yeah. And so it's a prevailing thing, right? We have those emotions, and I get it. Like, that's what life happens, and sometimes it's brought on by circumstances. Some of it is just our mindset, or sometimes it's our mindset. There are a lot of things that can contribute to all of it. But I was just thinking this week about, man, what's a great vision that we can have for our lives? Because God has a vision for our lives, but how do we kind of bring this into play? And I just started thinking about this idea of peace. When I say that word, my guess is if I said, hey, every person in this room could have peace. My guess is no one would be like, no, I like this worry thing, or I like stress, like it gets me going. If I said, man, we could have peace, my gut feeling is that everyone would be down to have peace. But when I say peace, I think we think, oh, like I'm going to start doing yoga or whatever it is. But peace is more than that. But I think peace is this thing that is available for us if we choose to want it, to really want it. If we choose to have vision for it for our lives, if we choose to engage it. It's like, what would you do to have peace in your life? Like if there was like a formula, if there was a way to do it, what would you do to get peace into your life? Would you be like, man, I would be so disciplined. I would do whatever it takes because peace is that important. Because man, my anxiousness, my worry, the stress I feel, it's just overwhelming and it's just crushing my very spirit. Here's the thing, like it is available for us. And truthfully, like this guy named Paul in the Bible, he gives us a pathway to kind of discover this. But I want us to think about peace a little differently. I wrote this down. I just said, peace isn't just being calm, but an assurance of who you are and why you are here. That's real peace. It isn't just about being calm. Like you can be around like chill people and you're like, oh man, you're chill, like that's cool. But when you're around truly peaceful people, you know when you see it? When life gets rough. When things just seem to be spinning out of control, or man, when something's thrown at them, you're like, man, how do you have so much peace? How are you able to kind of stay in that space? And it's because, you know what, they know who they are and why they're here. There's an assurance of the identity that they have. And, I believe that, like, we find that through faith in Jesus. We find that through following Jesus. And so this guy named Paul, so if you're new to this whole church thing, we believe in the Bible. All right, so the Bible is broken up in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And this guy named Paul was Jewish and once hated Christians, like hated them, actually tried to kill them and stomp out the whole Christian movement. And but then he had this kind of miraculous thing happen with Jesus, and he came to believe, and then became one of the greatest missionaries and kind of tellers of the message of Jesus. And so he would go city to city, spend time with people, and then he would write these letters. And his letters became a large chunk of our Bibles, in particular about half of the New Testament that we have. And Paul was writing these letters, and in particular he wrote this letter to the church at Philippi, and they were struggling with some of the same things you and I struggle with. Like just stress, being overwhelmed, and life circumstances throwing stuff at them, had conflict in between people, didn't fully know kind of their whole identity yet in Jesus and trust in that, and they were struggling. And so Paul writes this letter to them to help them out, to kind of think about things a little differently. Because when he started seeing that, here's what he knew, because he was Jewish, and so he knew the Bible really well. And in Isaiah chapter 9, There's this interesting passage that talks about the Savior, the Messiah that's going to come. And one of the descriptors that they talked about was the Messiah would be somebody, or the Savior would be someone who's the Prince of Peace. The Prince of Peace. You guys have probably heard that when we sing Christmas carols. Like during that time, like Prince of Peace, like we sing it and we don't even necessarily know where it comes from. That's okay, but like it's one of the descriptors of Jesus, because that's who we believe Jesus is. And that one of the descriptors was the Prince of Peace. And so for Paul, he's like knowing, man, they're missing out on the Prince of Peace. They're overwhelmed. And here's what I think, and this happens to us, that we miss out on the Prince of Peace because we always want to be king. We want to be the captain of our own ship. We want to rule everything. We want to control everything. And we miss out on the Prince of Peace in our life that's really available. And then we buy into all of these other things that end up overwhelming us. And so Paul's kind of like pushing that in on them. And he kind of begins to pen this letter to them. And he starts it this way in Philippians 4. And we're going to be in verses 4 through 9. He says this: "Always be full of joy in the Lord. I say it again, rejoice. Let everyone see that you are considerate in all you do. And remember, the Lord is coming soon. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done. Then you will experience God's peace." Do you see that there? How cool is that? I love the Bible for so many reasons. But part of why I love the Bible is just that crazy amount of wisdom. What Paul's doing here, we're going to see it again in a second. But he says, if you do these two things, then you experience this. He's going to do that twice in this passage. He's like, here's a formula for you. Like sometimes we're like, I don't know what to do. And Paul's like, if you do these two things, you will get this. Then you get this. And so if you're sitting here being like, I would love to have peace, Paul's going to give us two incredible formulas to experience that. He says, then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true, honorable, right, pure, lovely, and admirable. Think about these things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all you learned and received from me. Everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Ready? Then the God of peace will be with you. This is a beautiful, beautiful passage, and it's one of the more famous ones when it comes to worry and stress and stuff. People will often refer to this Philippians passage. But I want to look at a few things and what Paul is kind of detailing out of when he says, hey, the answer is peace. Then he goes, here's how you get there. And the first thing that he says is we need to be grateful and considerate. We need to be grateful and considerate. Now, what he's kind of referring to in the midst of this, in this phrasing, is that this is the idea of being gentle and patient. So this is the first part of the formula, okay? So it's being gentle and patient. Now, I know that's not like a common theme in our culture. We're not like, well, we're all just so patient with each other. We're all so gentle to each other. That's not like a thing. But what Paul says is that, man, we should be grateful. We should be gentle. We should be patient with people, considerate of others. Those words that he's using. And so when we think about this is the first part of the formula to experience peace and kind of create this vision for our lives, then the question for us, practically speaking, is how do we have a rhythm of life on a daily basis that promotes gratefulness? Like if I were to just hand you a mic and I would just say, hey, like, how are you grateful this week? Would you be like, let me tell you, Wags, here's what I do every day. Let me tell you the notes I sent out to people, or texts, or the emails I sent to people. Let me tell you the way I was talking to my friends or my kids, or or my wife or husband. Like how do you have a daily rhythm of gratefulness? Do you take time to do it? Can you remember the last time you did it to anybody? Like that you sent them a note, a text, or anything. Like to have a heart that's like, man, on a daily basis, I'm going to be grateful. Can you imagine, again, just play this out. Can you imagine if you wake up in the morning and you're grateful? You kind of got this rhythm and you kind of like take some time, like, hey, this is what I'm really thankful for. Midday, you're like, hey, let me just kind of review my morning today. Here's what I'm thankful for. And then at night before you go to sleep, you're like, man, here's my day today. I'm going to be thankful for this. Can you imagine, would your mindset change? Of course. We're all smart people in here. Of course we know. But is that what we do? No. I can't believe this. I can't believe that. Man, she said this. He said that. This is my life. I hate my life. Right? Like we just do it. Like we focus on like the negativity of everything. But can you imagine if we were thankful? Like they've even done studies about sleep patterns. And this is just like not even a Christian thing. It was just like they talked about how the more grateful people are, the better they sleep at night. If they spend some time at night just saying everything that they're thankful for that they can think of, then their sleep is like a lot better at night. And I'm just like, when I read that, I was like, man, I wonder where they could have gotten that from. And it's like this whole idea that like that's the way God designed us to be, to kind of have that heart so that we could experience. But they were like, no, you don't, Lex, you don't know my circumstances. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know the pain that I'm in. And listen, you might be in a rough patch right now. You might be in the hardest season of your life. But I'd be willing to put money on there are things you can be grateful for, to create a whole different perspective. Last week we took that quiz that everyone was really bad at, and we took that quiz, and it wasn't to like say everything's unicorns and rainbows, but what it was to say, hey, like our perspective can get off pretty easily. And even in our perspective, it doesn't mean that everything's so good. Like there's some things that are still awful, but maybe there's some things within that awfulness that are still okay. Like we see that things are maybe getting better. There's some really bad things, but there's some good things in the midst of those bad things. And so even whatever you're going through, no matter how hard it is, if we cultivate a heart of gratefulness, you can experience it, you can acknowledge it. I didn't tell this story in the first service, but I remember when my brother-in-law died in a car accident, Lacey's brother. We've been married for about 9 months, and so this massive thing happened. It was an awful thing. And I remember, it was about 2 weeks after sitting at dinner with her parents, and Pat and Charlene. And I remember Pat, and we were just talking, and Pat just said, you know what, this is a terrible time for our family. But he said this. He goes, but I'm just really thankful for the way people have responded and loved us. So it was horrible. And listen, I can't even begin to describe how terrible it was. But for the dad of a son who just died maybe it was like a week or two before that, for him to say that, you know what I'm really thankful for? The way this community and their people have just loved on us in the midst of this. And it was cultivating the heart of, and to be considerate, to be grateful of what was happening, even in the midst of what was bad. You see, when we let our circumstances kind of determine, like we can say like, man, you don't know my life, like this is why it's so bad, that's why I'm not grateful. It's inherently a little selfish, isn't it? I said it this way, if circumstances determine our peace, then we are basing it off of selfish motivations or selfish motives. Because it's, God, you didn't do this for me. God didn't do that for me. Or it's because of them. That's why I don't have peace. But that's inherently selfish within us. The second thing that Paul does is he talks about prayer. So we have this idea of gratefulness and being considerate and gentle and patient and those things. And then he says prayer. This is the second piece to the first formula that we see in there to how to discover peace. He's like, all right, so you got gratefulness, and then you got to have consistent prayer in your life. So let me ask you guys this. Do you pray more than you worry? See, can you imagine what would happen to our worry if we prayed more than our worry? If we engaged God in that way, if that was the regular rhythm of our life. When it comes to prayer, and I've done series here on prayer and stuff like that, but here's the kind of the simplistic way to think about prayer. Prayer is just simply you talking to God and building a relationship and a connection to Him. That's what it is. And so prayer becomes this powerful tool that we have to connect with God on a deeper level. Sometimes, listen, we think like, I can't pray as well as he can or she can. It's not about that. Prayer is all about your heart. And so your 10-second prayer can be just as powerful as another person's 5-minute prayer. But it's all about the heart and what you're developing. And so as you have that consistently happening, you will build your prayer time. There are different ways to do it. If you get distracted, you can write them down. There's a bunch of different kind of practical ways to learn how to pray longer and pray better or more intuitively with our words. But we've got to have a consistent prayer life. Can you imagine again? If, man, you started your day and it was thankfulness and prayer, and that, like, really, most of our prayers were kind of geared towards our thankfulness towards God rather than only asking. Like, that's kind of what happens most of the time. But can you imagine if our prayer lives were reshaped and we thought about it differently? We do this thing called 21 Days of Prayer here, and we do it every August into September, and then we do it in January. It'll be coming back up in January. And so we do 2 sets of 21 days, and then we do 1 set of 7 days of prayer. And so we do this to set the right tone for us and keep the right heart of what we're cultivating here. We also do it like prepping our hearts for new seasons of church life, because there's a rhythm and stuff to church life for people. And but here's what is interesting. We do 21 days of prayer together, and we've got 1,500 active people in our church. And, I think the largest 21 days of prayer we've ever had was maybe like 55 people for like one day. And sometimes, like, I'm like, man, everyone's stressed, and everyone's overwhelmed, and everyone's busy, and everyone's overworked, and everyone's blah, 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 right? All these different things. I'm like, here we are carving out opportunities for us to gather together as a community. I mean, even this last go around, we tried to make it even like easier on everybody. We're like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create all these different sites for people, like South Side, up in Mechanicsville, North Side, downtown, or we can just all gather here. We're going to create all these different sites, and we're even doing the videos online. Like our creative director, Matt, like literally practically killed himself, like trying to make these videos to get them out on time. And we're going to just 3 to 5 minute little devotionals for everyone to focus on, and like they can join us at 6:30 in the morning in prayer, and we'll make it super easy. Man, the numbers will just shoot right up. They didn't. I'm not even saying that to like make anyone feel guilty at all. It's like the challenge and the awareness to just have some perspective. And the reason why we know the numbers didn't change is because, like, we know how many people watch the videos. Like, we can see that, and then we know who was gathering where. And but here's the thing: like, we also heard like really cool stories of people, like a husband and wife, getting together in their house, and they hadn't been doing this together, and they started doing it. And I get it. Like, some of y'all have kids. I mean, we do too. But like, some of y'all have kids, and you're like, oh, I can't do this. And I'm like, I mean, there are plenty of people that come that have kids. They figure it out. Like maybe they alternate husband and wife each day or something like that. They do things to make it work, or they have the discipline enough to figure it out. Like sometimes I think we get such a distorted view on like our discipline and stuff. And I'm like, man, someday we're going to get to heaven and he's going to be like, why don't you guys like participate a little bit more in things? Like, why did you like not even go to 21 days of prayer? And like, oh, it's just so early. 6:30 is just so early. And like John the Baptist, you see him over to the left and he's got like his head here and he's like, that happened to me because of my faith, right? I lost my head. Actually, that'll be put back on in heaven. But I think we have like a distorted view of like how committed we are. And listen, it affects our worry. It affects our stress. It affects how overwhelmed we are. And here Paul is saying, here's this formula for you to get involved. Can you imagine, get this, can you imagine if 1,500 people in Hill City Church gathered for 21 straight days, and some of them might be in your own home because you can't get to a place to meet with someone, and I get that. But can you imagine if 1,500 people, we watch the videos with our kids too sometimes and stuff like that too, but can you imagine if 1,500 people gathered together and started praying you're telling me something different wouldn't happen? Nothing different would happen. But that's the challenge, isn't it? That's the accountability part that we seem to lack, and that's why we don't get the breakthrough that we need. And so this is part of the formula. Prayer makes us pause. It makes us recenter. It connects us to rest. We forget about this part. What prayer does when we have a dedicated prayer life, it connects us to this idea of rest, or the kind of Christian word is Sabbath. that's been around for a long time. This idea of truly resting every week. But what happens is as we overwork, we don't take the Sabbath seriously, even though it's not even like an option in Scripture, it's commanded. Do you know, like every single person that says they're a Christian, like it's a thing, like you're supposed to take a Sabbath every week. And then when we ignore that, we get overwhelmed. When we ignore that, we get stressed. We ignore that, we overwork. I think about this. We overwork because our worry has worked us over. And what happens is, we get like, well, if I don't do this, and if I don't work this way, and if I don't make this meeting, but here's what happens, then our relationships suffer. Like our spouses suffer, our kids suffer, our friends suffer, our relationship with God suffers. Because, you know what, we'd rather do all these other things. We'd rather put all these, we are super committed to like watching Netflix. Listen, we do too, so I'm not even like, that's not even judgment. But like, we're super committed to those things. And then we wonder, but I'm so struggling, God, why? And he's like, I've given you this really simple formula. Be grateful. Be grateful and plus, like, bring in like a consistent prayer in your life. And like in that prayer, like take time to rest. See, what rest says is that you know who you are. Rest says, I know my identity. Rest says I can trust my place with God. But we don't do it. And here's the thing. Prayer and Sabbath is an act of surrender, and we don't like that. We don't. Why? Because we want to be king. Prayer and Sabbath is like, I'm going to surrender all of this to you, God, because I trust you're bigger than all of it. Here's the first formula. Paul says this. It says gratefulness plus prayer equals a protected heart. And so when he says in verse 7, then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. He says, his peace will guard your hearts and minds. And you got to get this, what he's using this illustration. This idea of guarding, he's using a term that was used for soldiers. That it protects your heart. That no enemy can come in. That you have something there to fight it off. Those things that stress you out, those things that worry you, all those things. That this rhythm of life of gratefulness and being considerate of others, this rhythm of life of consistent prayer and rest protects our hearts. Protects our hearts in the midst of it. See, we cannot underestimate the weapon that peace is in the warfare of life. I'm telling you, like, man, this idea of peace in the midst. Like, think about how many people you talk to. Not even yourself. Think about how many people you talk to. You're just like, man, you need to get it together, right? You are so stressed. You're overwhelmed. Blah, blah, blah. But can you imagine, man, that peace is just something that sets you apart. And what a weapon it is in the warfare of life. Here's the last two things, the last part of the formula that he gives. Fixed thoughts. That's number 3. So we've got gratefulness. We've got prayer that leads to protection of our hearts. And he creates this other formula. He's like, you got to fix your thoughts. And what does he say to fix your thoughts on? Things that are true, honorable, right, pure, lovely, admirable. That's actually a pagan saying that he actually uses there, that he redeems it by the focus, because he's like, because of who Jesus is, fix your mind on these things. Have the mindset of these things. Stuff that's pure and honorable and right and lovely and admirable. But it all goes back to this kingdom mindset, what our true focus is really on. But here's what happens. When our thoughts are in another direction, when our thoughts don't make any sense, when our thoughts are fixed on things that aren't pure or aren't lovely or aren't honorable, when our thoughts are in other directions, our identity gets so out of whack. And then we find our identity in things that are not of Jesus. We find our identity in like money or who we're dating, or if we're going to get married, or if I can have kids, or power, or status at my job, or whatever it is. That's where we end up getting our identity from. And so when things just kind of get off center, that's what happens. And so we'll say that we have our identity. We say that we know our identity, but we really try faking it, don't we? We're putting in all these other things that don't matter. They actually bring more pain into our life. And so here are kind of 3 indicators. I was thinking about my own life. What are the 3 indicators that would prove to me that my thoughts are a little off center? And here are 3 for me, and maybe they resonate with you. The first one is this: blame. You might blame yourself for certain things. That's where you just get fixated on. And you beat yourself up all the time about things. Or maybe you blame God because he just hasn't answered the prayer like you wanted him to. Or hasn't come through in the timing that you wanted him to. Or maybe you blame others. Like that's your story. Like you've just consistently just blamed other people for everything. It's their fault, it's their fault, blah, 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 blah. Like it's just the constant state of blaming. Well, what that'll show you is your thoughts aren't fixed on the right things. The second thing is shame. Shame is different than guilt. Guilt is the consequences of something that you've done. Like there's an actual consequence and you're guilty of it. Shame is taking on the identity of it. That that's who I am. This could be a lot of different ways for you. I remember for me, there's a season of my life where I've shared this stuff with you guys before, but I had a rough decade of my life with choices that I made, in particular with women. And for a long time, I didn't believe God's forgiveness was bigger than that. And so I took on that piece as like my identity, and it always was pulling me back. Like I didn't have real confidence, real trust. And even truly in the beginning of my marriage with Lacey, it was something that I battled and struggled with and had little moments of it that we would talk through. But just feeling the shame of that. But you know why? Like looking back, why that was happening? I wasn't fixing my thoughts on the right things. I wasn't fixing my thoughts on what was pure and honorable and lovely and admirable. It just wasn't. I was focused on the things that I just took on my identity. The third thing is this, that we're desensitized. We're desensitized. If it isn't pure, then it's polluting. Let me say that again and just picture what you watch and what you listen to and how you talk. If it isn't pure, then it's polluting. And so I think we could desensitize to things way too easily, don't we? Like you watch something and listen, most people in this room have a show you should not be watching. Present company included. And we've eliminated certain shows and we're whittling them down. And but let's be honest. If it's not pure, it's polluting. And it's almost like sometimes I'll sit with people and they'll be like, man, I'm struggling with this in my life. And I'll say to them, what are you filling your brain with? And they'll talk about the shows they watch and the music they listen to and stuff like that. And I'm like, you're telling me that has nothing to do with what's going on in your head? Or what you're struggling with? What you can't get past? Nothing. Not a thing. No. You can't. All that is we get desensitized to it. We just get desensitized to things. And so just paying attention to the purity of things. And what is that doing to us? We can't brush those things aside as if it doesn't do anything. And I'm not saying hey man, you just gotta, it's only you can only watch Christian broadcasting, don't even do that. But you can only watch just really wholesome shows that have heaven in it. I don't know, but I'm not that way, but I just think it's paying attention to what's filling our heads. You're not too old for that. We'll do it with our kids, right? Hey, turn away, don't watch it, don't watch that. Only I can. But it still builds into all this stuff. And so it's important to take that in. And it's not just what we watch. It's not just what we listen to. It's also what we read. I remember when 50 Shades of Grey came out, and all these Christian women were reading it. And I was like, what? I'm like, what in the world? Right? But paying attention to what you're reading. Or how about this? How we speak. We get desensitized to how we speak. Let's be real. We get desensitized to gossip. I know we throw it in with our prayers, but we get desensitized to gossip. We get desensitized to when we're slandering people. We get desensitized to those things, right? We do. We're all probably guilty of that. If it's not pure, it's polluting. So here's what Paul says, right? This is the second equation he gave us. Fixed thoughts plus action will equal an awareness of the presence of God. That's how he ends it. That's the fourth thing, to put things into action. He says fixed thoughts plus action equal awareness of the presence of God. Look what he says in verse 9. He says, keep putting into practice all you learned and received from me, and everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Then the God of peace will be with you. Then you'll be more aware of his presence in your life. Then you can tell God's with us every step of the way. But it doesn't happen until we fix our thoughts on the right things and we put those things into practice. If we just keep learning things and don't put them into practice, guess what that makes us? A hypocrite. And so that's why it's so challenging with this whole idea of a breakthrough and being a visionary for your life. It's like, man, you got to have an action item in all these things that we're learning and growing in. It's fun to learn. Listen, I love learning, which is crazy for me to say because I graduated U of R with like a 2.2. But I love learning now. I study and learn and all the time. But there is also, you can get too much knowledge. You can get overwhelmed with it, and you can be like, man, look at all the verses I know. Da, 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 da. And it's like, well, if you don't do anything about it, it doesn't mean anything. You're just a hypocrite about it. And so, I'm all for learning and growing, but we've got to put things into action. On our way back from a conference this week, I was telling Lacey and Maddie, I was like, man, sometimes I just feel like I should just basically preach 4 different sermons and just rework them. Or maybe just when people come in, we sing a little bit, and I just walk up here, and maybe you guys would like this more, but walk up here and be like, did you love God with all your heart this week? Did you love other people with all you got? No? Let's do that. And until we do that, then this is what we're going to do every Sunday. But sometimes we're like, well, I need this, and I need layers, and I need depth, and I'm blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, we can't even do that. And it's the simplest thing, right? But what is it? That's the awareness of whether or not we're practicing what we preach or what we're talking about. So fixed thoughts plus action equal an awareness of the presence of God. So, do you want to be king or experience the Prince of Peace? Do you want to be a visionary or a dreamer? You've got to answer that. Let's pray. God, I know we all come into this room with different stories and perspectives and life circumstances and different places on the journey of faith as well. And, but God, I think if we pause here for just a second, we know that you're speaking to us. And I don't know specifically what it is for people. I don't know if it's something around shame or blame or being desensitized. I don't know if it's about a lack of gratitude or a lack of prayer life or, I don't know, whatever. But God, you're speaking to all of us in some way. And God, my prayer, all morning long, has been that we would take whatever that is, we would fix our thoughts on what is pure in the midst of that, and then we would put into action what you have for us, because I want us all to experience your peace and what that means. And so, God, that starts with a heart of confession and taking time to truly confess the ways that we're falling short of you, confess the sins that we have in our life, to confess the ways that we're doing things opposite of what you have. And then taking in just kind of how you're speaking to us, then putting a plan together, practically speaking, that allow us to experience you on a deeper level. That's where real transformation will happen. That's where a real breakthrough will happen in us. So God, I pray we will be grateful. I pray we will consistently come to you in prayer. I pray that we will fix our thoughts on the right things. And I pray that we will be people of action, because then we experience your peace that surpasses all understanding and guards our hearts. then we become more aware of your presence in our lives. We thank you, God, for who you are and what you're doing and what you want out of us. In your name we pray, everybody said. Amen. Hey, before you guys get out of here, a couple things. One, if you did say yes to Jesus today and you want to take a next step there, please stop by the What's Next Lounge on your way out. We've got people there ready to talk with you and help you think about some next things to do on your journey. We've got a Bible for you and some other stuff too. If you just want to get connected here, please stop by there as well. The next 2 weeks, we've got 2 more weeks in this series. Next week, we have a guy by the name of Darren Patrick coming to speak here. And Darren's become a good friend, and it is a huge blessing for Darren to be here. He has a national voice and has had for a long time now. And he's going to be talking about continuing this breakthrough series and talking about some emotional health stuff, and which is part of his testimony. He's a fantastic speaker. You do not want to miss next Sunday. And then the week after that, Lacey's going to close out the series, and she's got a word for you guys, and so just buckle up because I've heard it. And so it's going to be good. But you guys have a great rest of your Sunday, and we'll see you next week.